everyone, it's Justine with a card for the AAA Card Challenge. Today we are focusing on embossing, and over the next 2 weeks it would be great if you would link up your projects featuring any sort of embossing that you're doing. So to get started, I'm going to grab a piece of scrap white cardstock and I'm going to place it not in the corner like I usually do in my MISTI, but a little bit further away because I'm going to be using a rubber background stamp and I want to make sure that the background stamp stamps on the whole card. It's not possible to put it in the corner. I am going to put it as straight as possible, and I'm going to use my grid lines to help me do that. So I'm going to place not only my card on grid lines so it's straight, but also the stamp on the grid line so that it's straight. This is the dictionary stamp from Stampin' Up, and I'm going to be stamping it using Versamark ink and heat embossing it using some white embossing powder. So I'm going to ink up my background stamp now using Versamark ink. I'm going to make sure that I have full ink coverage. This is a very detailed stamp and stamps really well to make really cool backgrounds. For time purposes, I'm just going to speed you up during this process. You've probably seen me emboss before. So I'm stamping and I kind of put my fist down and made sure that it was nice and stamped over everything. And I am also going to take a scrap piece of computer paper so that I have any sort of fallout from my embossing powder. Usually I do directly in the container, but for whatever reason I just decided to grab some scrap paper and go old school. I'm just going to dump my embossing powder back in and get any excess off with a dry paintbrush. I'm going to heat emboss the background, and I'm going to use tweezers to hold the background so my fingers do not upset any of the embossing powder. It also keeps my fingers from burning. So you can see it sort of turn there in the light as it starts to melt with the embossing powder. And I'm going to move on to the watercoloring. So I'm using picked raspberry, abandoned coral, seedless preserves, and I believe worn lipstick if I'm not mistaken. And I am going to grab some water and I'm just going to put it all over this background here. And I'm just going to go in with the different colors here. So I'm going in with seedless preserves and picked raspberry, abandoned coral, oh, and also barn red was the fourth color. Sorry, not worn lipstick. So I created a nice background filled with many different reds and purple colors. You won't be able to see all of them on the heart. I'm just going to set that off to dry. I'm going to take a stitched heart die from Lawn Fawn, and I am going to cut out a piece of my water background, and I'm going to save this water background actually, just in case I want to cut anything else out of this for another project. So I'm going to stick that through my embossing machine, my Big Shot here, and cut that out of the background. So this is a really awesome way. You could leave it the background as is and add a sentiment on top, or you can cut something out of it and then use that as something for your project as an embellishment. So you can use that heart, for example, for a really great shaker card. I'm going to grab my cardstock. This is a 110-pound Nina Solar white cardstock. It measures 11 by 4 1/4 inches, and you can see I have a score line at 5.5 inches there to make a top folding card. I'm going to cut the sending sentiment out of white embossing or white scrap cardstock, and I'm going to send that through my machine. This is definitely one of my go-to die and stamp sets, is the Sending and Wishing stamp and die from Simon Says Stamp, and I know it's sold out really often, so I know it's just a really great stamp, and I use it all the time. It's definitely perfect for any occasion. So I am using the Sending one. Normally the sentiment that I'm going to be stamping underneath Sending would go with the Wishing die, but on the inside of the card I made a nice surprise for a friend. So I'm just going to get all these small bits out of here and attach the Sending and the heart here. But before I do that, I have to go in and complete my sentiment. So I'm going to be stamping a little bit on some black cardstock. So I'm just going to set all of that off to the side, grab a piece of scrap black cardstock from Simon Says Stamp, and I am going to be embossing a sentiment from the Sending and Wishing stamp set onto the black cardstock. So I decided to use Sending You the Best. Now again, it should say Wishing You the Best. It wasn't a mistake, it was done on purpose, because on the inside of the card I ended up stamping the word stamp sets, because it was a stamp gift that I had given to a friend. So I am just going over with embossing powder, heating that up just like I did with the background. The only difference though this time is that I'm embossing on black cardstock, and the white really stands out. So I like using white embossing powder versus white ink, because white ink doesn't stand out as much. And it can also be really messy. So I'm just going to cut out this little area here. I decided to turn it around a little bit here so I could get a nice even cut. And I am going to cut a banner out of it. So I'm just going to cut this, and then I am going to put a dot in the center of the back of the card, so I did that with a white gel pen. And then all I need to do is cut towards that dot to make a nice banner. One day I'm going to invest in a die so I can save myself the hassle of doing this, but I've gotten quite good at it that I actually don't make as many mistakes as I used to, so it's definitely one of these practice makes perfect techniques, that's for sure. I used to get the most wonky borders and thought the technique never really worked, but overall it does. You just need to practice. Alright, so the next step is just to assemble everything. I added some 3D foam tape to the heart, made sure there was lots on there so that it didn't sag at all. I put it sort of on a slant in the bottom right hand corner. I did the sending die using Tombow Mono liquid adhesive because I had forgot to put stick-it tape on the back so that it would have really stuck nicely, but that's okay. It just takes a little extra work and a little bit more mess. I stuck the little dots on the eye, and then I added some glue and put "You Only the Best," and I overlapped the S, the bottom of the S and the G on top of that. So it made a really nice, clean and simple card in my opinion, but it did need a little bit something extra, so I decided to add some little sequins on here. These are Moon Fairy sequins from the Ton, so they're pink, but they're a really transparent pink, or translucent pink, whichever word you want to use there, not quite sure. So they have a little bit of a pink tinge to them is what I want to say, instead of being all white. So really complemented the card quite nicely, I think, for a nice clean and simple look. So I hope you enjoyed this card and the detailed embossing, and you are inspired to go over and play our embossing challenge this week. All the supplies used are linked to below in the video description or on my blog. You can access my blog up at the top. You can click on the subscribe button to subscribe to my channel, or you can click on the creative slump little icon there to see my last video for my go-to card when I am in a creative slump. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you another day for another video.